Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey everybody, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Joanna Penn. Joanna Penn is a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of thrillers and nonfiction. So we got both sides of the coin. I'm excited to dive into that. She's also a professional speaker and entrepreneur, voted as one of the Guardian UK Top 100 Creative Professionals of 2013, and her site, The Creative Penn, is regularly voted one of the top 10 sites for writers. It's the place that all writers go to get productivity tips on nonfiction, on fiction, all kinds of stuff. Joanna has a lot of great content. Highly recommend checking out that site. We'll talk about that later in this interview. But really what we're going to dive into in this interview is the writing process. Joanna is a prolific writer. Not only does she have the accolades, but she's also got a lot of books. So it's quality and quantity. And she's really known for getting that out. And then what I think is really cool, fiction and nonfiction, two very different styles of writing. We're going to talk about that, get into the techniques and all that good stuff. But Joanna, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Chandler. This is fun.
Well, we're going to have a lot of fun on this interview. And I want to kind of start it off. Where did this journey all start? Because I know the story, but I'm sure a lot of people don't know it. So where did this start and how did you get into writing?
Well, I always wrote journals, so I was one of those, journalers as a teenager, but I didn't do any kind of other writing, and I did theology at Oxford. Again, not a very useful degree, but then I went into consulting, so I worked for Accenture, which is a big consulting firm, IBM, things like that, and ended up actually implementing accounts payable systems into large corporates, the very definition of a cubicle slave, and I'm sure many people listening can recognize this kind of life. And I was kind of in my 30s and just going, what am I doing with my life? And I tried to figure out what I wanted to do. I started a scuba diving business. I started doing property investment, and none of that fulfilled me in a kind of creative way. It didn't set me on fire. And I just, how can I find what I love? And so I started writing a nonfiction book. I thought, if I write a book about how I can change my life, maybe it will help other people and also will help me change my life. And that book is called Career Change. And actually it did change my life because I learned about writing, publishing, started my site, The Creative Penn. And essentially from there, it took me 3.5 years before I was able to leave my job. And I started writing fiction. So basically now, what I am is as you said, an author, speaker and entrepreneur. But it's been probably like a 15-year journey to get here, essentially. So I hope that makes people feel a bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it didn't happen overnight.
No.
You talked about writing that first book about career change that changed your life. Let's talk about that. And then what was that transition like from being able to go from slowly transitioning over to the author side of things and being able to quit your job?
Yeah, so you've got to admit, the first book you write, you don't have a clue. Like, as well. Nonfiction is a lot easier than fiction. So just, staying with the nonfiction for a minute, creating, essentially, I did a lot of research. So all my books, I do a lot of research. So at the time I read a lot of books, and I think reading a lot of books is really important, and understand what a nonfiction book looks like in the genre you're writing. So I was reading a lot of self-help at the time. And then I just, at the time I was using Microsoft Word, like now I use Scrivener. And I just wrote loads of notes and then gave it a go. And I think I just kind of made it up as I went along. I didn't do any courses at the time. So, and this was, we're talking 2005, 2006, but years ago, like you were probably in like junior school or something.
Yeah.
And there was no Amazon Kindle. There was, the self-publishing option was Lulu, which, is nobody really uses. Well, I know some people do, but most of us don't use that. but essentially it was just kind of, and traditional publishing was very much the way to go. So, but what happened was I wrote it, I used what we now would call beta readers. I didn't know the term at the time, but I got people to read it who worked with me and said, do you find this interesting? And they would say, yes, or this needs changing, that needs changing. And that's a big tip to people. You've got to get people in your target market to read your book and give you constructive feedback. And I did get an editor at the time as well, so I paid for an editor. And I paid for cover design. It wasn't that great, to be fair. I've had it redone since. I've actually rewritten the book since the first edition and recovered it and everything. But what I really learned doing that is I loved the process. And what I love with writing is being able to go, look, I made this. I haven't got a book handy, but I made this book and it's a finished product. And because what I feel with work, like the day job, is you work and work and work. All you get is a paycheck, but you never feel you've actually achieved something. And especially as a consultant, everything I ever did is obsolete. It's crazy. Whereas with a book, for me, especially fiction, this story can earn me money for the rest of my life and 70 years after I die. That's just magic. That is magic. Yeah.
I love that you drew the difference there, the difference between making a temporary change to the company you're working for versus making a permanent impact through a product you've created. That's a big takeaway. And I think a big kind of subconscious thing that happens whenever, it happens to every author. The first time you get that, you don't really, it's just words on a screen. It's just text in Microsoft Word or Scrivener or whatever you're using. And it doesn't really dawn on you until you get that first thing. Like I remember for me, it was like this book, it could stay in my house in an attic somewhere. Someone could buy it. It could stay. And like after I die, someone could stumble upon this book and it's actually there.
Yeah. And yeah, it's amazing. I mean, really, I don't think there's any other business that does this so well, to be fair. And the connection, what I like also is if somebody read my book Career Change Now, you would be accessing my brain. It's like a mind meld across time and space, which is amazing too. That's very cool.
For so cheap, right? Like there's all these expensive products and personal coaching and all that. And the thing I love about books is like you get all that distilled into a small bit that you can read in a few days and for like $7-10, 50.
And I would say as well, like that book Career Change, it sells, whatever, but that book really changed my life. I really believe the first book you write will change your life, because you either, like you've written more than one book. If you write one book and you enjoy it, you will write another book and probably another one and another one. If you write one book and you're done, you're not an author. You are an author, but you're not a writer. Like you don't, because for me, I mean, I've got about 8 books in my head at the moment that I'm, always working on more and more books, because I love it. I love the process. And so if you write that first book, it can really, really change your life as to what you want to do, but you don't know that until you've done it.
Right. And how did that book change your life? Like the process?
Well, I realized that writing was the thing. So I had written a book in order to try and find a business, like a scuba diving business or, the property investment thing, which was the thing of making money at the time. And I actually discovered my passion was in the writing and the learning and helping other people. And that's when I started blogging and podcasting and all that. So in sharing my knowledge, I then started to build the business. So the business came out of a passion, which I know is not what everybody preaches, but for me it was very much like, I just love this. Anybody who looks at everything I do, I mean, I just love my life now, and compared to when I was super miserable as a corporate slave, this is brilliant. So, and it was, I realized that I also enjoy the publishing side, because I self-published before it was trendy, as I said, and I enjoyed the publishing process and I enjoy marketing. So I think if you enjoy all parts of the process, you can be, an author entrepreneur. If you don't enjoy the publishing and the marketing, then you probably best traditional publishing. So it's really great. I mean, the process will change your life because you can tell what you enjoy.
Got it. And let's drill down into the process, but the writing process of that first book. And what were things that you learned by writing that first book on the writing side of things?
Uh, it's such a long time ago. It's probably best to talk about writing how I write now.
Hmm.
So, because I've just written another nonfiction, um, actually called "How to Make a Living with Your Writing," which is kind of
Hmm.
useful. So, essentially, now I use Scrivener. So, I use Scrivener for everything, for fiction and nonfiction. And with nonfiction, I basically brainstorm. And I would have done this in Microsoft Word at the beginning, but Scrivener is great for dragging and dropping. So it's brainstorming all the potential chapters or parts within a topic. So I tend to come up with topics that fit my audience. I have an audience of authors for nonfiction anyway. I may branch into other things at other points, but right now it's just for authors. So I think I actually have emailed my list. If people have a list, it's good to ask people what they want to read.
Hmm.
So I actually sent a list of different things and got people to choose. And then I brainstorm the table of contents, and then I basically fill in the blanks, fill in each of the content thing. And my editing process, I've got a book here. I'll wave it at you. This is my latest fiction. So you can see here, I print every first draft out, and I edit by hand that first draft. So it's all printed out. I edit, scribble, and I do that for fiction and non-fiction. Then I type it all back into Scrivener. Then, depending on how happy I am with the draft, I may do that process again. So print it all out, handwrite, do it again. Then I will give it to my professional editor. So I pay an editor specifically for, for fiction content and structure and line edits. For nonfiction, I'm more confident, so I just pay for line edits. Then I give it to my beta readers, but at this point of where I am, I think when you're at the beginning, you get beta readers and you may need to do quite a big rewrite. Whereas where I am now, the beta reader is more about getting early reviews. So
Hmm.
that's, they're less beta readers than early reviewers who pick up last things. And then I also pay a proofreader who is the final person to touch the manuscript in terms of typos and last minute checks. And I've got a brilliant proofreader who finds crazy things. She's amazing, well worth paying an extra bit of money, just a couple of $100 to just get rid of that annoying typo that someone's going to find otherwise. But so I really do invest in that, in an editing process, more for fiction than non-fiction, but definitely for both. And then I publish.
And so it's writing it, then printing it out, making physical changes, and then you said that you retype.
Yeah, I
You
type
retype.
up the changes into Scrivener. Yeah.
Okay. And then to the editor, then to the proofreader, and then to publish.
Yeah, basically. Or with beta readers in the middle, depending on what stage you are.
Got it. And did that process look similar when you did your first book, or how has that process kind of morphed over time?
Uh, well, I think I've become a better writer for a start. I
Hmm.
think writing is this crazy, stupid realm where people assume that the first book that you write will be the best book you write, which is just crazy. I mean, would you say that to a musician or an a painter? No, it's crap. So I'm on book number 16 now. So I'm a better writer than I was on book one. So certainly book one, I spent a lot of time editing and rewriting, but you every time you write a book you learn new things. So I think at the time, that's why I rewrote that book. So the copy of Career Change now is significantly different to the original book I wrote, which you can only
Hmm.
buy on Amazon as a secondhand book now. Might be worth something one day. But so that's changed. I also didn't really know enough professional editors, so I just used kind of somebody I knew. The cover wasn't really great. I mean, where we are now is brilliant because there are freelance editors, freelance cover designers everywhere, whereas back then that just really wasn't happening. So it was much more difficult to find people. So, and also I didn't even know about that. I also definitely got ripped off because
Hmm.
there wasn't really comparison services and there wasn't Kindle or ebooks at the time. So I just did a print run, which I would tell people don't do. Don't do a print run unless you have a way to sell the books and distribute the books. just do print on demand is my kind of opinion on that. But I mean, the writing process in terms of going somewhere, putting words on a page, that's exactly the same. It was very difficult, I remember, to use Word because you have to copy and paste large chunks and it's very hard to manage. That's why Scrivener is, I think people need to use Scrivener if they're going to do this like professionally with lots of books. It's very hard to manage otherwise. Yeah, so those are probably the main changes.
Okay, and so you were just touching on how you've done 16 books, which is a lot, and obviously there's a lot of repetition there, and you become a better writer simply
Mm.
through repetition. But what are some other things that you've done along the way that have made you a better writer beyond the repetition?
Well, employing professional editors.
Hmm.
For my first novel, I employed probably 5 different editors at different stages of the process. So, like a story structure editor, I got a big name editor in America that I paid to give me like a manuscript critique. I got several line edits. I got one line edit, which was basically like, you need to rewrite this.
Hmm.
Rewrote it, got another edit, So I spent a lot of money on that first novel in terms of editing because learning how to write a story is very different to writing a nonfiction book. For the
Hmm.
nonfiction, I don't think it's such a big deal. The main thing with nonfiction is understanding the flow. I think that's really important. And as a speaker, I know a lot of your listeners will be speakers. It's actually quite useful being a speaker because if you're doing, say, a full day course or, like you're doing online course, you have to lead people through a journey. And a nonfiction book needs to lead people through a journey as well. And so does obviously a novel. So that's good. But certainly paying a professional editor, and the editors I've got right now are brilliant. I think you move into different categories of editor as you improve, because some editors won't take you if you're just not good enough. But you become better and better. And every time I get an edit, I learn new things about what I'm doing wrong or what I could improve. I also take courses from people who are making money in the way I want to make money. So I take courses at the moment from Dean Wesley Smith. So people can go to, it's wmgpublishing.com is their course site. So it's Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush. Have you heard of them?
I haven't.
No, they're fiction. If people are fiction, these guys are in their 60s. They've been publishing for like 35 years. They have 500 plus books, between them, and they make incredibly good money with fiction. So for me, I want to learn from people who have done what I want to do. And I think that's really important. And the thing is the more you write, it's great. I've done courses. I did how to write a novel, like a full year course. So I keep paying for learning. I think paying for learning is really important. I know you believe this too. Many of us are course junkies, I think. But I love taking courses and learning new things. I also read a lot. I read a lot in my genre and learn from what other authors are doing. I'm not one of those people who says you shouldn't read in your genre. I think you should. If you're writing a business book, like you should read like 50 business books so you understand, how the genre works. Yeah. So anyway, I think all of those things, and what's great about being a writer, you will never, ever stop learning. You'll never be able to finish. And if you have, then you should probably go and do something else.
Exactly. It's this lifelong learner mentality.
Yeah, which is why it's brilliant career, and you can do it until your brain dies. In which case, I want to die. So when I'm 95 and my brain's about to go, then. But
You don't want to
you
make it
really
to
can do
100.
that. No, well, whatever. By then we'll all be on those longevity drugs and we'll all be fine.
Oh,
But no,
that's great.
I think what's great and what's also great, just on the business side, is that the career means the more books you write, the more money you earn. So instead of people who get to 65 or whatever and retire and then their income drops, for writers, it just keeps on going up,
Hmm.
which is awesome. Let's face it.
Yeah, that's great. Now let's talk about you. I'm going back just a little bit. You touched
Mm.
on learning the art of writing a story. So how did you go from that first book which was nonfiction to learn, like, how did you learn the art of writing a story, and how, and then later we'll draw on comparisons between nonfiction and fiction. But let's start out by, like, how did you go from nonfiction to fiction and learn how to tell a story?
Well, first of all, I did NaNoWriMo. So NA NaNoWriMo, you can spell it out in the notes, whatever. So NaNoWriMo.org, which is National Novel Writing Month. So I did, I had a blog at that point. I started blogging and I saw NaNoWriMo and was like, do you know, I should do that so I can blog about it. There was I had no intention of ever publishing anything. It was more of I should just do that so I can blog about this thing. So I did it, and I wrote, you're meant to write 50,000 words in a month. I wrote 20,000 words of an idea that I recently found. A journal of mine, I had this idea like maybe 6 or 7 years before that, and I didn't even realize. So it was awesome to find that notebook and realize that the ideas had been noodling around. So I had 20,000 words, and of which I only ever used about 5,000, but it was an idea. And when you've been locked in corporate world for a while and nonfiction, you can often feel like you don't have enough ideas, or that your idea flow is somehow blocked. So I was super excited because I didn't think I could have had a story idea, and I did. So then at that point, I started, like many authors, you'll be reading a lot of books on how to write and how not to write a novel and how to write a novel. But at that point, you have to get over the hump of from reading all the books to actually writing something down. And you can't edit a blank page. So you have to write. You have to fill pages with words. And that's the hard bit. So I enrolled on a course, which was how to write a novel in a year, which was 6 weekends over 1 year of going to a local library. And, there was a teacher there, and we did character one time, and, but really the main thing was to have a full year and to have a manuscript by the end of the year. And what was classic, and this too, she said, out of the class, like there were 35 people or something, 1 or 2 of you will finish the book. And I was like, I am so going to finish the book. And I think I was the only one, to be fair.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had people email me from that class and say, oh my goodness, I remember you. I'm still working on that book. And this was sort of 6 or 7 years ago. So this is really important for people. Set a deadline, okay? Like, be hardcore about a deadline, because you'll hear people say, oh yeah, I've been writing a book or writing my first novel for 10 years. And it's like, no, get over it, finish the book, and then write another book. If the book is crap, put it in a drawer, write another book. Eventually it won't be crap. Get some editors, that type of thing. But so I did this course, but what I did do by the end of that year, I had a first draft, and then I started going through that paying for editors process. I know some people use critique groups, but again, I prefer to learn from people who actually do this professionally, or people who do this for a living themselves. I think too many people take advice from those who are not successful in what they're doing. I mean, you have to choose your mentors very carefully. And when I say mentors, I don't mean it in a relationship sense. I just mean the books you read, the blogs you read, the podcasts you listen to, the advice you take from stuff. It must be from people who are making money in the way that you want to make money, for example.
Absolutely. And I love that you touched on that, because that's the reason I dropped out of school. Is I got tired of learning how to run a business from professors who had never ran a business.
No.
And it was like, well, this doesn't make much sense. Like, I'm learning from people who are actually doing this. I should drop out and keep running my business and keep learning from people who are actually doing it.
That's exactly right. So be wary. People should be wary of reading books that say how to write a novel by people who might not have written a novel, or have only written one, or whatever. So yeah, and especially in our days of happy Kindle time, just be wary of who we're learning from. But no, it's great. And I mean, you've got your business books in Kindle, bestsellers all over the place, and that's the thing. You have to prove you can do it. So I felt after I wrote that novel, I really enjoyed the process, but that first one took me about 15 months. So it was a big deal. And there's, if people are interested, at thecreativepenn.com/first novel, I've got all the videos and blog posts because I was doing videos for NaNoWriMo, everything from the first idea to when I got my New York agent, and I launched the book and sold, you know, it was a bestseller. And so it's a really funny process of like 14 months from I haven't got a blooming clue to, you know, getting an agent and all that. So yeah, it was really fun. But after that, then I wrote the second book, took about 10 months. Third book took about 6 months, and then since then I'm now at about 3 months, 4 months for a novel, basically.
So for that first novel, do you have any funny videos of like you crying and like frustrated and anything like that?
There's one that's really interesting. It's called How It Feels to Put Your First Book into the World. And I'm quite emotional in the video. And the funny thing is, I don't feel that so much now, but I was scared. What's so interesting with nonfiction to fiction, nonfiction, you are very much focusing on the other person. So, you know, you're teaching something, you're helping someone, you're answering problems. Yes, you put in your personal stories, right, in order to bring it alive. But you're not really sharing your innermost thoughts about God and, you know, faith and sex and all kinds of stuff. Well, you know, you might be, but so with fiction, what happens is you become part of the book. Obviously, I mean, it's a fictional book about fictional characters, but you end up putting stuff in there that perhaps you haven't shared before, and you know that people will read it and they will judge you. So for me, the fear of judgment is massive. I mean, it is for many people. I'm not so much fear of failure, but fear of judgment, what people might think of me when they read my books. It was like, so this video, I think I suddenly realized what I'm doing. I'm like, people are actually going to read this. It's super scary.
Mm-hmm.
So and that, you know, it's still but how you know, James Altucher, right, you know, blogger, and his kind of thing is, if you're not scared about pressing publish, that you haven't done a good enough job. So now I'm trying to lean into that, and that is some authors call it critical voice. You know, it's sort of self-censorship, not writing, and it's very disrespectful. I asked Stephen Pressfield about this. I interviewed Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, on my podcast. Yeah, amazing guy, like my guru. On the podcast, I asked him about self-censorship, and he basically said it is disrespectful to the muse. And if you disrespect the muse, then you're going to lose her, and, you know, you can't do that. So I was like, okay, I shouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, Stephen Pressfield.
Yes, thank you very much, sir.
I will take that and use that. Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement. Yeah. So what was that process of, I mean, was it really tough going through that process? It sounds like you enjoyed it, the process of writing your first fiction novel, or was like, what was that process like? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think the, well, a friend of mine, he's an adventurer. His name's Alistair Humphreys. He has a type 1 fun and type 2 fun. Type 1 fun is like, yay, I'm having such a good time. I'm like drinking, I'm at a club, or I'm at whatever. I'm, you know, happy in the sun, swimming in the ocean. That's like type 1 fun. It's fun. Type 2 fun is when you do something and you look back on it later and it was fun. So you climb a mountain or you cycle up a really massive hill, which I was in Croatia last week. That was type 2 fun. You know, cycling up a hill, writing a book. It's like type 2 fun because much of the process might have been quite painful, but you're like, yes, at the end of it. So in that, I love what I do, but it's still hard work to create words. It's actually really tiring, especially fiction. And I've discovered why now. The reason fiction is so tiring is because when human beings have to make choices, it depletes everything else. It depletes your willpower. It depletes, all the stuff about Tim Ferriss and diet and all that. If you lessen the number of choices you make per day, you have more energy for other things. Fiction authors have to choose every single thing that happens in every sentence and what happens to each character, which is very, very tiring. And you end up eating loads of cake because you've lost all your willpower. But so I think in terms of the word enjoy is interesting. I love what I do, but the sense of achievement is what is fun about it. I love making stuff up. I love all of it, but the word enjoy is a difficult word, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I love what you were saying about the type 1 versus type 2.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to keep that in my brain and keep using that, because I've never heard someone explain that well.
Yeah, so that's my friend Alistair Humphreys, right? You have to credit him.
I'll credit him, not you.
yeah, not me. That's definitely him. Yeah.
So I like that, but then I'd never thought about it from a fiction standpoint, and this is probably because I'm not a fiction writer, but I'd never thought about it from a fiction standpoint that of all the choices you make, and you're controlling the entire story, and how that could be so tiring.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Like last month, I did a lot of words. I did 49,000 words last month, which for me is a lot of words. And for some people it's not, but for me it is. And I was so tired, and I had RSI and my body felt like it was falling apart, and I was just exhausted because I was trying to get some drafts finished before my holiday. But this is the thing, I was just so tired. And it's not like digging ditches tired, it's brain tired. But no, it's a super achievement, I think, to write any book. But for me now, what is magic about fiction, I find at this point, because I've got my process sorted now, I listen to waves and rain and thunderstorms, and sometimes I read what I've written and I don't know where it's come from, because I kind of go into that. I'm not channeling, I'm not that type of person, but as in I read it and I'm surprised by what kind of comes out. But that is me relaxing into not censoring what I'm writing. So that's actually very satisfying. But I don't know how anyone could describe sitting in a cafe for 2 hours fun in the same way as like swimming in the Pacific or whatever.
Yeah, and I love that you said digging ditches tired versus. I think I want to step back and pull that out, because I found it's kind of a tough realization to have, right? Like I grew up my whole life doing physical labor, and I was good, and I was energized by that. Like I could go out and work a 13-hour day and feel on top of the world, and then the next day do it again, and there's something energizing. You're getting a workout, you're releasing endorphins. And I did that for so long, and it was a weird realization to where as you get better at prioritizing your task, and as I got into the business world, into the writing world and all that, and I could block all those things out and focus on what really matters, I found myself getting more tired, which was a hard thing to come to grips with at first. And like I remember one of the first businesses I ran was a painting business. And there were some days that I would just want to go out and paint with the guys, because that was so much easier to do than to actually think and solve problems. And so I can totally relate to that. And I think that's something that happens to everyone as they dip their toes, whether it be into the business world or the writing world. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Oh, good. And I mean, this is the thing. I think also having your own business and doing this full time is very hard. Every year I write a kind of roundup of being an author entrepreneur. And the first year, it's so funny looking back, the first year says it is much easier to have a day job. Even for me, it's important for me to have a little commute to get out the house, to actually meet people, because otherwise you just go completely crazy. And actually, it's interesting, I can't create for more than a couple of hours, maybe 4 hours maximum a day of actually new creative work. And then the rest of it is, interviews and blogging, social media, podcasting, whatever. But the actual producing book work has to be done in the morning for me, and it has to be done before about 2:00, really.
And then you schedule your interviews and other things for after that?
Yes, and I'm very lucky because I'm in the UK, and of course, for you it's the morning, so it's brilliant because generally most Americans I could talk to at their morning lunchtime. It's my evening, so that's super.
That's great. I function the same exact way.
Sorry.
So this is my productive time, and I'm doing an interview. But no, I love that you said that. I think that's really important, because whether you're doing coaching or whether you're doing writing or whatever, like, it's great if you are doing coaching to put that in the afternoon, if you're doing interviews, if you're doing calls, meetings, all those things. So that, going back to what you said earlier on willpower, you can use that high willpower when it's the best, and get in that creative zone. Kind of like, this is drawing another connection. We're going way back here. But kind of like to what you were talking about the war of art in that book. I think it was Somersault said, he was asked if he writes when creativity strikes, or if he writes on a schedule. And he said, well, when creativity strikes, of course. And luckily, creativity strikes every morning at 9 a.m.
I know. I think it's Stephen King. It's Stephen King.
Stephen King. Cool.
Yeah, I think it's Stephen King who says that. But that's the thing. And now I have my process, and I go to, and I think it's the habit thing. It's the one thing that if you do the habit of, now I either go to the library or to a cafe, and then I do 2 hours in one cafe, and then I walk to another cafe. So I walk across the commons. Talking about the body thing, you really have to look after your body. I'm on a Swiss ball. I can bounce up and down. But to do my back bends, I have to do back bends, because I was in hospital for back pain a couple of years ago, because as a writer, you really screw up your back unless you walk and do exercise and stretching and stuff. So yeah, right. Look after your body, everyone. I've completely lost my train of thought now.
Yeah, no problem. I did want to touch on how we talked about this a little bit earlier. So your first novel, I think you said 14 or 15 months, and then you said now that process is 3 months. We talked on how you've gotten better. Is there anything else you want to touch on in that realm of how you've cut that time down from 14 months to 3 months?
So the concentrated production time is important, and making that habit. So like I said, going to wherever away from the desk where you do interviews, I think is a good idea, and away from your spouse, your children, if you can get out away from all of that, and set your timer and actually make words, actually make them in that time. Don't just do something else because you can't think of anything. Actually commit to that time. So that's a really big deal, and it sounds simple, but it's not easy. The other thing is learning structure, learning your genre more, having a series. So I have 2 series. The thing is, once you have a series, you have character, you have not formula, but you have the way the book works usually. You have the world. So it's much quicker to write books in a series, because you just need to come up with a new plot, and your characters quite well. So I have 7 books in one series and 3 in another series, and then some other books. But doing the series is quite good. That definitely speeds things up. It also means that people were likely to buy more books, because if they like one of the books, they'll buy more. So it's a very good marketing thing too. But there's, you have to, I'm not really an outliner. Like some people are really hardcore outliners. I'm not, but I'm learning more and more how to do at least a rough outline. And in fact, this book, Deviance, I'm really, really pleased with it, because it's a clean draft. It's a pretty clean draft, and I'm super happy. It's really like the second time now. The last book before this was also a good draft. And hat tip to Stephen Pressfield and his business partner, Sean Coyne, who wrote The Story Grid, which is a super book. Really recommend that. Again, I interviewed Sean on my podcast early in January, and he has a 1-page outline thing that Stephen Pressfield uses, and that's really helped. It's almost like a screenwriting thing, but you have to have your various pivot points. And so if you just have a 1-page outline, it will help you get past the blank page. So I'm really embracing that with my next book. Gonna double down on doing this 1-pager and then schedule the hours. Now I can normally do between around 2,000 words in that block. So it should only take, 35, 45 days to write the first draft of a novel, like 70,000 word novel, for example. It should take that long. And if it's a clean draft, then you just need to go through the editing process. The thinking time takes time, obviously. So at the moment, I'm thinking about some new series, and that will take more time than others. But essentially structuring, habitual writing, actual words, and writing, like doing word count. So I've got a do you think people want to see my calendar? I'll show you my calendar.
Absolutely.
Can't get it off the wall. I have a wall calendar. Like some people have spreadsheets, but I have a wall calendar because here's my you can see my stickers and things. Do you see stickers? So what I do is I write my word count and I get a sticker if I do really well. It's for children, but you have to do these things. And actually somebody, who was it? I can't remember who it was, but someone says that your creative side is a child. So you have to keep your child happy, your inner child happy. So I have those adult coloring books as well. I think a lot of girls like them more than boys, but I really enjoy coloring stuff. So I give my creative child permission to do some coloring when I'm doing my writing. I do a bit of coloring and then start writing. So that makes my little writing child happy. And then I do my writing and I log my word count. And I have my deadlines, as we said. So especially if you're self-publishing, nobody else is going to give you a deadline. So you have to set your own deadlines. Yeah.
I now want to touch on for just a second what you said. I think that there's a common theme that I've kind of seen in what you were talking about, especially in the sticker thing, but even back to the coffee shop thing and switching coffee shops is the Charles Duhigg power of habit. He talks about the habit. So you have the trigger, the habit loop, and then the reward. And in this case, the trigger might be sitting down at your desk. That's not an interview desk. It's your writing desk. Then you have the habit loop of writing, and then you have the reward of getting a sticker if you reach your goal. And then similar at the coffee shop, you have the going to the particular coffee shop, that's the trigger. Then you have your writing. Then the reward is maybe a coffee or a treat, but also switching coffee shops and going to the next one. So I love how you've kind of infused that in your writing process.
It's taken a long time to get to that. The other thing I would say is the audio. Like I listen to Rain and Thunderstorms on repeat. It's the same album, just over and over and over again. The same Rain, and I think it's like gets my brain into a certain state. I think some kind of white noise, it shuts out the coffee shop noise, but it also, for me, Rain and Thunderstorms means right. So as soon as I hear Rain and thunder, it's being British. I know you live in California or something. Being British, I'm like, it's raining. I must do something.
That's great.
Yeah, so I think some people listen to like different music all the time or have one album for a particular book, but I just listen to, as soon as I hear Rain, I'm writing. So that helps me too.
That's great. Now, how do you balance writing on a book project versus writing for your blog? Because I'm sure both of those kind of go simultaneously, or how does that work?
Well, it used to be that I would blog primarily and then I would write books later. In the last year or so, 18 months, I have actively written blog posts to go into books. So my last book was Business for Authors, How to Be an Author Entrepreneur, which was very, structured around how to run a business as an author. And so I kind of, it's interesting you asked this because I am actually at the point where I'm doing a weekly podcast and I rarely write blog posts now.
Got it.
So I'm kind of saving my writing for books. or things like, I wrote a really massive post the other day on pros and cons of being an indie author. That was really big, and that won't go into a book. And I wrote that because I went to a conference and met a whole load of authors who were unhappy with their lot in traditional publishing. So I write for the blog when I have something to say. And you know how it is in the self-publishing niche. When I started my blog in 2008, there weren't many people talking about it. Now there's a lot of people talking about it. So I'm not just going to write and yet another whatever post. So I write something when I've got something to say, or it's a podcast. So and I don't do guest blog posts anymore, written ones. I save my words for books, but I'm always happy to do podcasts or audios.
Great. And now one final question and final thing to riff off of before we wrap up is productivity tips for writers. So you touched on Scrivener a little bit earlier, and how that kind of goes with your writing process. What other tips? We can dive on Scrivener, we can talk on other stuff. What are some other kind of productivity tips, hacks that you use that you feel like would be helpful for people writing their first book?
I mean, most of them we've covered, like in terms of the music and the cafes, and I mean, Scrivener really is the best tool for writing. Absolutely. I don't know how people manage without it. To be fair, I don't think I have any more productivity tips.
Maxed out.
I mean, I guess I should say that when I had a day job, so I did my first 5 books when I had a day job, and as a consultant, so I was working, long hours. I would get up at 5 and write. So before work. So, and then in the evenings, then again, I was blogging and podcasting and things in the evening, but in the morning I would get up really early and write. And then I took Sundays as well, and did that the weekend. And then eventually I moved to 4 days a week in my day job. So I made the decision, and it's a big deal for people. It's like 20% of your income that you give up. But I just was at that point where I couldn't, you're like, oh, if I only had a bit more time, I could actually achieve something. So I moved to 4 days a week. But you can only do that if you make a decision that this job doesn't matter. And that's very hard for people. I realize that you have to say, look, this job is just to pay the bills. It doesn't matter. I don't have to go up the corporate ladder. I just have to do what I'm paid to do. And then I'm going home to do my real job, which is to write books, or I'm doing that before work or whatever. So everyone can make the time. It's just, what are you going to give up? And for me, it was a bit of sleep and TV. We got rid of the TV. Now we download shows and stuff, but and choose what to watch. I think that's a really big thing. Choose what you put in your head. Stop just mindlessly watching the news. In America, it's shocking what your TV is like. It really is. Your terrestrial TV, you have some brilliant TV shows, but your news cycle and all that, it's just, you can just feed your brain just crap. So stop doing that, and you'll have miraculously have a couple of hours that you can spend doing that. So those those 3 things really: going part-time, getting up early, getting rid of the TV, or at least having a diet, an information diet or a TV diet is a really good idea. And then I guess the last thing I would say is, this is such a brilliant career, but I've also learned it's not for everyone. So I think there's real peer pressure in our niche now for everyone to be like, yeah, you must be full-time, and you must be writing loads of books, and you must be making 7 figures from your books. But what I've kind of learned is that everyone's got their different way of doing things, and some people are much happier writing slowly and writing one book, or maybe they're a speaker first and their book is a secondary income, that type of thing. So I want to say to people, this is fantastic however you're going to do it. Or maybe you're just writing that one book, and that one book will help you with what you want to say to yourself. Even if it doesn't sell loads of copies, that one book could change your life. So, definitely write it, definitely publish it, and then decide whether you want to do another one. But, we love this.
I think that's a great place to end it. We talked about some final tips. We found some in there. You pulled them out of the bag, and that was a great place to leave people with, is if you want to do this, and like you said, it's not for everyone, but if you want to do this, you have to find the time, you have to make the time, whether that's getting up early, getting rid of the TV, however you have to do that, taking some time off of work. You have to make the time. It's not just going to come there. So Joanna, thank you so much for sharing this. I think this has been really helpful, especially on the writing side for people who are thinking about writing that first book. And now they've got some tactical information. They can see not only how you've done it, but your best recommendations. So thank you for that. And before we head out, where's the best place for people to learn more about you and to find out more?
Thank you. So my site is thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And I also have the Creative Penn podcast, which you can find on iTunes or at thecreativepenn.com. And I'm on Twitter at thecreativepenn, surprisingly enough. And my fiction is under JF Penn, F for Francis, if anybody's interested in some kick-ass thrillers.
Awesome. Joanna, thank you so much for coming on. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chandler.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help the podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.